So I'm going to start by saying you can just watch this video individually if you wanted to learn about Saturn, the archetype of Saturn, or you wanted to understand some of the major themes with the transit of Pluto going through Capricorn since 2008. So you can watch it from that perspective, or you can watch it as part one of a three-part series. And so I did a video that was it's a little over an hour long, talking about the Pluto transit through Aquarius and what that's going to mean. And I wound up talking about the archetype of Saturn, the archetype of Uranus, talking about Capricorn, talking about Aquarius. And so I decided right before I was going to upload that to chunk it up and just do it in sections. And so this is section one, where I'm going to talk about the overarching themes of Pluto transiting through Capricorn. And then I'm going to talk about the archetype of Saturn. And so with that, let me share my screen and I will get talking about that. So Pluto into Aquarius, and just in my mind, I feel it's redefining reality, right? That's kind of the motto that I put on this transit. And so Pluto has been transiting Capricorn at the time of this recording here at the end of June. It's back into Capricorn. So it entered Capricorn in January of 2008, and it's transiting through that sign until January of 2024. Now, that said, it did enter into Aquarius this year in March, but then it's went stationary and it's going retrograde again back into Capricorn. So it's going to retrace the last 3 degrees of Capricorn, 27 through 30 degrees, or 27, 28, and 29 degrees. And so let's talk about Pluto going through Capricorn and what that signified as a collective, right? But I always like to talk about these things internally because everything external is just a reflection of what's going on internally, right? They both play off of one another. And so the Pluto transit through Capricorn, I put up here, I put redefining reality. And so in this first bullet point with Pluto going through Capricorn, reality transformation. So I almost see it as setting the groundwork. It's almost like I get this vision of a jackhammer into concrete and it's shaking up the foundation, right? And so that's what I get when I feel into the symbolism of this transit. And so it simply, for me, says, is how I'm living my life aligned with my soul desires, how I want to actually actualize and express myself from a soul level. And so Capricorn, and I'm going to get into this a little more in the section after this, is the container, right? And by container, I mean your thoughts, your beliefs, and the environments that you're a part of that contain this is the way that we do things, right? And so, again, back to the jackhammer in the concrete, in the sidewalk, right? Or just on the ground, let's shake things up, right? Let's examine what are we really being a part of here, and is it working for us, right? And so this period of time, especially during COVID, time of soul searching, which can generate things like depression or the feeling of being in a void or the feeling of meaninglessness, right? And why do those feelings get generated? They're generated so that you can get some time removed from your circumstances, removed from relationships, removed from environments, or just simply shifts within those structures that you're a part of, to reflect and to say, hey, what's working here and what's not working? What areas of my life am I potentially subjugating myself or I wanted to say like half-assing it, but that's not really what I'm getting. It's more like, where am I splitting my energy? There you go, right? Meaning that I'm half in consent with my reality. It's like, it kind of ticks these three boxes. It doesn't tick those other two boxes, but it's just something I've been conditioned to do, or an environment I've been a part of for a while. So I'm going to keep doing it, right? And so when we have this jackhammering effect on the concrete, well, that shit gets broken apart, right? And now your reality shifts. And so, yeah, it's going to shake up your foundation. And we've seen with Pluto being here since 2008, large shifts, both externally and internally. Maybe the shift has been experienced by you as an external shift, which caused you to change your behavior or change your routine or change the way you've been doing things for a long period of time, which the purpose of that from a soul perspective is to reflect and say, where have I, how did I engage in some of those environments, and how can I change things moving forward, right? And so bringing to light any emotional, intellectual, physical, and spiritual patterns that have outlived their usefulness, right? So every facet of your being, right, could have or had the potential to be affected during this transit. The one big thing is limiting beliefs coming to the surface, right? Like one I put here that came to me when I was creating this is, I believed I couldn't make it on my own, but now that I've been forced to, I can, right? And so that's a limiting belief that could have been brought to life, right? That's just one example. But when you have that jackhammering effect and the change to your reality, things like COVID, right, was a big one that everyone was affected by deeply, right? It changed a lot of people's realities, right? People had passed away, people had gotten ill. The way that we engaged with people changed. We backed up, right? Like I said, that second bullet point, time of soul searching, a depression, a void, right? So this environment that was created by this disease created us to back up, to go within, to remove ourselves from certain situations and people we've been a part of, right? And so that caused an examination, potentially, right? It depends on how each individual handled this time period, right? Depression can tip over into, I'm going to need help here, right? Or I can't even function on a daily basis, or just being stuck in the feeling of being in depression and being in this void that keeps spiraling to a point of you need help, right? In order to sustain your existence. Or in the extreme cases, somebody may take their life, right? Because they can't get out of this looping pattern that they're in, right? And so limiting beliefs was a big part through this transit, right? How I've constructed my reality and what I believe has been shaken. How do I move forward in a way that is more aligned with how I really want to express myself, right? The other thing here is career realizations, because Capricorn is related to career and how you're seen in society, right? So there's been a lot of shifts. And certainly the big one that we're all familiar with is COVID, and how that changed the way we interact in our careers, right? Or coming out in society, right? So things like changes in work schedules, the typical way we've always done things, right? Confrontations, promotions can be a part of that, right? Taking on more responsibility is a archetype of Capricorn, one of the indications of a Capricorn archetype. And the other thing is complete career shifts, right? So all of those were experienced on some typically, or I'd say by a lot of people, career changes took place during this transit, right? So some of them that, for me, I wound up leaving corporate America, right? For other people that I've spoken with, the realization that the work schedule isn't working anymore, right? So I've heard of shifts of no longer a 5-day work week, right? Like we're putting in too many hours. We're consuming most of our life in this one area and it's not healthy, right? So corporations or companies are changing their work schedules, right? More flex time, more vacation time, more time to do other things other than just this career path. The other thing is the way we do things, right? Like think of remote work, right? The big shift to working remotely and using technology to do your job, right? A lot of companies, my company, the one I used to work for, hated that. They were like, no, we don't promote work from home. You need to be in an office 5 days a week. COVID forced the jackhammering effect, forced the structure of you need to be in the office 5 days a week to no, now that's not an option because of this condition that we're all dealing with. We need to work remotely and we need to make it work, right? Which then people got space because they weren't going into the office 5 days a week to start reflecting, right? Realizing, oh, is that really healthy for me to be doing that? Because I feel different when I'm at home, right? I feel like I have a lot more space, right? And I actually can get a lot more work done and I don't have the stress of commuting to work every day, right? And so there's compare and contrast. And then there's the other side of that, which is like, well, I do like interacting with people. And now that I've been forced to the other extreme of the spectrum, right, where I'm not interacting with anyone other than the people that live in my house, I miss that, right? So now you can start experiencing things from a different perspective and saying, okay, well, these things I like and these things need to be changed, right? So now we're actually forming, which is going to be part of this Pluto going through Aquarius, this more healthy blend of like a hybrid type style of work, right? Which is like, well, maybe there's some days where I feel like working from home and that's cool. And other days I feel like interacting with people in the office and that's cool too, right? Or maybe just me as a unique individual, I like just strictly working from home. I don't like to be in the office. I really enjoy being at home, right? Or the other person might be, man, I really missed being in the office. I really like going to the office every day. And so I'm going to do that. But I see the overarching thing from a structural standpoint, think of companies and businesses, some shifts that have taken place is to be allowing for that now, right? Where the example that I was part of, where they're like, well, no, you can't work remotely. Well, they got forced to allow people to work remotely, and then they realized people are still effective working remotely. They still do a good job. And a lot of occasions, they do an even better job because they don't have to worry about the stresses of fighting traffic and they don't have to worry about the distractions of going into the office and people walking up to you and saying, hey, did you see this? Or, hey, what about this? Or, hey, can you check out this? And it's like, well, no, I don't have to deal with that distraction when I'm at home, right? Maybe there's other distractions with like your spouse or your kids or things like that, but it's not the same as being in the office, right? Which again, forced changes, right? And so these are some of the themes that I see or that we have seen with Pluto transiting through Capricorn. And so now I'm going to transition to just talk about the archetype of Saturn. And when I talk about the archetype of Saturn, you can either, I mean, you're going to take the information the way you're going to take it, but kind of how I envisioned it is you can either just view it as, skip forward to this bookmark in the video and say, okay, I just want to learn about Saturn, check. Or you can learn about Saturn, but use it in the context of Pluto going through Capricorn, right? Since Saturn rules Capricorn, Saturn also is a co-ruler of Aquarius, which Pluto is going to be entering into, right? And so when I talk about Saturn, think of Pluto being the symbol of transformation, right? Bringing you more in alignment with your soul, going through this archetype. So you may be able to identify some more things than what I talked about here in this brief description of this Pluto transit through Capricorn. So good old Saturn. So the authority, symbolism, which I don't think I even have here. Um, but one of the things it symbolizes in your chart is typically the father, although it doesn't need to be the father. It's just however the structure or whomever held the structure in the container for you growing up. So it could be a parent, could be a caregiver, you name it, right? However, reality was structured for you when you were younger, right? So the other thing that it correlates to is time and space. So I like to describe this as if you think of like Neptune or the symbolism of Neptune, which is like universal consciousness. If you close your eyes and you meditate, or you just go within and you close your eyes to blank out the five senses and go internal, that's like source energy, that's your soul expression. And so when you do that, you're not aware of time and space, right? Like somebody that gets into a deep meditative space, there is no concept of time and space. So Saturn symbolizes that. When you open your eyes and you're aware that, that desk is over there in a different location in space from me, or if I wanted to walk across the street from the park, I know that it's going to take me, I'm going to need to walk from here to across the street, which is going to be a certain amount of distance, the measurement of space and time for me to get there, right? So that's the symbol of Saturn, right? One of the symbols of Saturn. It correlates to borders, boundaries, containers, the country you live in, your skin, your skeletal system, really anything as a container, right? Like this water bottle I have here is a container, like anything that holds a structure to be able for you to operate in, or just to hold a container for you to operate in. The other thing with Saturn is experience plus time equaling wisdom. So a lot of times when I see Saturn in somebody's chart, I see the symbol of, I say to people a lot in my sessions, I'm like, wait for it, wait for it. It's like you may think that you are ready for some experience or something, or like if you have Saturn in the eighth house and you want to have that deeply transformative experience within a relationship, and it's like you may need with Saturn there some experiences of maturity around that area, right? To be able to understand what it really means for you to authentically be able to step into a merged relationship with somebody else without losing yourself, right? Or to understand what you bring to the relationship. You need some time and experience to gain the wisdom, right? So that's another symbol of Saturn. The other thing here, I did have it in here, is parents, right? Conditioning, parents and society forms what you believe, right? So think of yourself as a little baby coming into this world. You're conditioned by your upbringing, right? Whatever that was for you, the experience of your parents, the experience of caregivers, that starts to shape your reality and how you view reality, right? So Saturn, like I said in the beginning, relates to that structure. And then I put in here neural pathways, which relate to the belief systems, right? So whatever you're conditioned to believe by your environment creates your neural pathways, right? Like these synapses in your brain that connect different concepts and different ways of doing things together. And it's kind of like I use the analogy of a highway. So like when somebody builds a highway, they map it out. The highway is built, it has twists and turns, and it connects one part of the land to another part of the land, and it's a way for you to get from point A to point B. And so you can think of the same thing in your brain as you get conditioned, right? Through parents and society and school, is it creates these belief systems or these structures, right, that you operate within. It also correlates to societal structures. So you think of your government, right, and rules and laws. So whatever country or location or ecosystem that you were born into has a certain way of organizing a group, right? And so think of that societal structure as this is the container, the laws and the regulations and the way that we're going to do things in order to sustain our existence or hold a container to be able to operate as effectively as possible, right? Now, that can be supportive, right? Like if you think of government, like there's certain programs and there's certain support systems and there's certain creative ideas that are I won't say creative idea. I mean, could be, but there's certain rules and regulations, right? Just keeping it generic, rules and regulations that are handed out to the collective, which I would call the consensus, to say, this is how we're going to do things, right? And so that conditions the masses or a collection of people to know, okay, this is how we need to do things here, right? And it's always, this is created to keep order, right? Like I think of the polarity of, or the energetic expression of Aries and Libra, right? Or Mars and Venus, right? Which is like taking your own unique expression and bringing that out in relationship to other people, right? So there's always a consciousness level to doing that, right? Some people may be, for the most part, unconscious, right? So if they don't like you, they'll go up and punch you in the face, right? And it's like, well, that's why we have these governments, rules, and laws in society to say, you will know you can't do that, right? If you do that, you're going to get punished. There's consequences for doing that, right? And so there's this structure that gets created to keep people safe and secure and help the majority of those people be able to live a meaningful, healthy existence, right? Now, there's also structures that are restrictive or structures that are created by people that are in a lower frequency, right? So those structures become restrictive and they are not helpful to people that are at a higher frequency, right? So when I talk about these structures, I always talk about them in terms of consciousness level of the individual, right? The more conscious and aware you are of yourself and your multidimensional beings and the guides that surround you and all of the, you know, that everyone around you is an expression of source energy, the less you are going to resonate with lower frequencies, even if that's governments or that's groups that you're a part of, you're going to find yourself pulling away from those groups, right? So the more conscious and aware you are, the less you are going to resonate or rely on consensus level laws, regulations, and guidelines, right? Not that you're going to break them, because if you're conscious, then you're going to navigate to natural ways of expressing yourself, which innately within you, you're aware, right? And you're not going to hurt other people. You're actually going to live at a higher vibrational frequency, right? And so I always like to talk about consciousness when I talk about these structures. The other thing Saturn represents is, how do I integrate myself into society, right? So I use the example here. I want to be an animal doctor, right? So think of a child growing up and becoming a teen and being like, I really feel called to help animals, right? So what does society tell you you need to do if you want to do that? Well, graduate from high school, earn your undergrad degree, graduate from vet school, pass the national licensing exam, pass the state licensing exam, apply to be a vet, right? So those are the steps, 1 through 6. This is how you would integrate that desire to be a vet into the society, right? That's one example of Saturnian structure and how you would have to conform to that in order to do what you wanted to do, right? The other end of this is going back to what I talked about with this container or laws or regulations and boundaries, is as you gain in consciousness, you start to you could feel restriction, blockage, or just simply rigid, which is your belief systems, right? So let's break this apart, right? So restriction can be, I have a natural inclination or desire to do something which is natural, right? It's not distorted, it's how I want to act, but I'm restricted in some way. That could be a relative, it could be physically, emotionally, spiritually, like you name it. Think of restriction in any form or fashion. We'll just pick one of like one of the examples I have here is I come into this world and I'm naturally gifted at being a psychologist, right? I'm just, it's innate within me. Maybe I've done it in other lifetimes. I just can see between the lines of how people behave, right? And what the true meaning is behind their actions. Well, you may be able to sit with people and help them, but you're not going to be recognized by Saturnian type people or your society, right? Unless you go and get a degree that says, yep, we have certified, you've passed the requirements to become a psychologist, right? And then you can advertise your services and you can be a psychologist. But you're like, but I already know how to do this, right? So there's frustration in terms of why do I have to spend 4+ years in school to get a degree on the wall to say I know how to do this when I already know how to do it, right? So that can be a frustration that gets felt because of the structures that are out there in society, right? The other thing is the other things that contribute to this is trauma, either in this life or past life. So what I talk about with trauma is when trauma occurs to somebody, and when I talk of trauma, I'm not just talking major earth-shattering events like a loss, like a death, or physical injury, or an extreme illness, or things like that. Traumas can simply be somebody that's highly sensitive can be traumatized by somebody close to them or their family not recognizing their sensitivity, right? Can be a level of trauma, right? And so whenever you have trauma, I think I've created another video, hasn't been published yet, but think of your soul incarnating into this body and you have this funnel of soul light coming into your body. When you experience trauma, the what happens organically is that, say this funnel is this wide, right? When you're in your organic natural state and just expressing yourself naturally the way your soul wants to express itself, it's like this. But when you experience a trauma, it shrinks. And so your soul is not allowed in, or the full light of your soul is restricted and blocked in some way. And there's a reason why. It's to keep you safe so that you're not overwhelmed by the experience of the trauma, right? If you had this full soul light and you were traumatized, the intensity of that trauma would be too much for you to handle in this 3D reality. So your consciousness or your soul light shrinks a bit, right? And so that could be the experience with trauma. So now at some point, you will need to process that trauma so that you can open up to more of your soul light again, right? But for the time being, Saturn relating to time, your soul light might be restricted a bit, right? To keep you safe. But as time goes on, there'll be a time when it's time for you to open that funnel back up again and allow more of your soul light to come back in again. And so during that time where your light is shrunken down, yeah, the feeling of being restricted or blocked could be the experience, but there's actually purpose in that, right? The other thing here is limiting beliefs, which I talked about a little bit, right? Which is maybe you have some beliefs that were conditioned in childhood that are restricting your own self-expression, right? Like you feel like you want to express your sexuality in a certain way, but maybe sexuality or expressing your sexual nature was something that your parents restricted, right? Or they felt it was not natural, or that you can, like, think of a teaching from parental structures that said you should not have sex until you're married, right? Would be a limiting belief, right? That could have been projected upon you. And maybe, if I looked at your chart and you had a heavy second, eighth house signatures in your chart, you're a highly sexualized individual that needs sexual energy to express yourself creatively. Well, if you have that type of expression and you're conditioned with the belief that you need to hold and not have sex until you get married, how is that going to be expressed, right? It's restriction, right? That could come out in distorted ways. And I'll get into that here at the bottom. But so simply going back to the main expression here, there could be an experience of restriction, blockage, or just being rigid within your mental structures, right? The other thing here is focused effort, personal authority, and empowerment, right? And so being able to focus on, hey, from a soul level, I want to accomplish this. There's a strong desire in me to do this. I'm going to put my energy and my focus into this, so much so that I'm going to accomplish it, right? Like whatever is holding me back or whatever's restricting me, I'm going to understand where those blockages are. I'm going to transcend them, and I'm going to move forward, right? I'm going to be able to put in a lot of focused energy. The cardinal archetype, right, of Capricorn, I'm going to be able to put a lot of energy into getting things done, right? Capricorn. The polarity sign to Capricorn, ruled by Saturn, is Cancer, right? So that's the emotions, right? The emotional side of your existence, where Capricorn can be pretty rigid, right, and restricted. Cancer is more feeling into emotions, expressing emotions, understanding their emotions. And so part of this archetype is bringing on board the Cancer archetype to the Capricorn archetype, which is understanding your emotions, understanding maybe emotional needs that were not fulfilled in childhood, being able to recognize what those are, being able to meet those for yourself, being able to express your emotional needs to others, not projecting emotional needs onto other people or expecting other people to cater to your emotional needs, right? Taking responsibility for your own emotions is the other side of this Capricorn archetype, right? The other thing here is repression, suppression, distortion, which I touched on with the experience of restriction, blockage, or rigidity, which is if I'm exposed to an environment, parents, caregivers, society that has somehow educated me, conditioned me, or restricted me physically, emotionally from expressing myself the way that I naturally want to express myself, it's going to get repressed, right? I can't express this, so it's repressed, which can come out in distortion, which means it comes out in unhealthy or abusive ways, right? So let's think of when I think of Saturn and I think of Capricorn, I often think about religious conditioning, right? Which is like making you feel for making at some teachings, making you feel bad for just being who you are, right? And expressing yourself the way you want to express yourself, or just the simple fact that your body is forbidden, or sexual activity is forbidden, or it's not right, or it's wrong, right? So the archetype of judgment, right, can get conditioned, right? Which then represses your natural expression, right? And so that could come out in distorted ways, right? Which, if you think of, I think of the Catholic religion, which is like what I was exposed to as a child, but think of all the distortion which was part of the Catholic religion, right? Which is like abuse and sexual abuse and just a lot of unhealthy ways of expressing energy, right? Because of the conditioned repression that was part of that belief system, right? And so anything that's repressed would be symbolized, especially in past lives, by the symbol of Uranus in your natal chart, right? And so anything that's repressed has got to come out, right? It's energy. Energy needs to go somewhere. It's got to be able to express itself. And so at some point, any trauma that was been caused by some of this distortion or oppression, any of that trauma needs to be brought to light so that it can be healed and transformed, so that you can evolve and bring in more of that soul light to your expression, right? So this type of stuff needs to be worked through, especially any distortion, right, or distorted activities. Why did this come out distorted? What's the underlying cause for me thinking or behaving or reacting in a distorted way? I need to uncover the deeper meaning of that so that I can stop, right? I can express myself in healthy ways as a part of this. The other thing is reflection, solitude, depression. And I already touched on this in the beginning, but yes, there can be times where you need to disconnect from structures or disconnect from people, or potentially things that happen externally affect you in a way that causes you to reflect, right? Which simply means I need the time, I need the space to reflect so I can gain wisdom, right? So that's what is happening here, right? And the only time that this would tip over, like I said, is if there's a spiraling effect where you keep spiraling on the void or the emptiness that was left by the change, and you're not recognizing the opposite side of the space you were given to be able to reflect on what happened, right? To be able to evolve and move forward. And so that, I'm going to leave that there. That's going to conclude this video here on the archetype of Saturn and a description of Pluto going through Capricorn. So I appreciate you checking this out. Thank you so much for the likes and the subscribes. And if you're interested, you can click on, I'm going to put a link to the description. It should show up here at the end of this video, the video on the Uranus archetype and Aquarius. So thanks for being here, and I'll see you again in another video. Thanks.